What if a single blind date changed your life forever? For Daniel, a wealthy millionaire, it was supposed to be just another night. But when he met Sophia, a humble waitress, things quickly spiraled out of control. She had a secret that could destroy everything Daniel had built. As their connection deepens, the truth begins to surface, and Daniel finds himself torn between love and everything he's worked for. Can someone with everything truly love someone with nothing? Or will the truth tear them apart? Before we dive into the drama, comment below where you're watching from. Stay tuned. You won't believe what happens next. Daniel sat in his sleek modern office overlooking the city skyline, his fingers lightly drumming on the mahogany desk. The tension in his shoulders was palpable. He had never been one for blind dates. In fact, he had always dismissed the idea of love entirely. His life was about power, control, and success, not romance. Yet here he was, reluctantly agreeing to meet a woman he didn't even know, pushed into this situation by his friends who thought he needed to lighten up and find someone special. He glanced at his watch, the thick leather strap gleaming under the fluorescent light. He had 10 minutes before he needed to leave. His friends, relentless as ever, had ensured he had no way out. "You're too good at building empires, Daniel," they'd joked. "But when was the last time you built a relationship?" The words rang in his ears as he made his way toward the elevator. He had nothing against women, he just had no use for them in his life. Business had always been his priority, and that had served him well. Meanwhile, in a small, cozy apartment tucked away from the city's luxurious hustle, Sophia was preparing for the same date, though with far different feelings. She paced nervously around her room, eyeing the modest dress she had bought especially for the occasion. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but it was the best she had. She had never been to a fancy restaurant in her life. As a waitress in a modest cafe, the world of millionaires felt foreign to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her reflection in the mirror. Long brown hair, tucked behind her ears, and a pair of bright green eyes that always seemed to give away her emotions. She had been unsure about the blind date from the start, wondering what someone like him, a millionaire, well-groomed and polished, would want with someone like her. She wasn't sure she belonged in his world, but there was a sense of curiosity that stirred within her. After all, life didn't offer many second chances. Sophia took a deep breath and left her apartment, forcing herself to push aside the nerves that gnawed at her. She had no idea what the evening would bring, but she knew this. It was an opportunity. For better or worse, it was an opportunity to step outside the small, predictable life she had built. Sophia arrived at the restaurant, her heart racing as she stepped out of the cab. The establishment was lavish, its marble floors gleaming under the soft golden lighting. She hesitated for a moment, adjusting her simple black dress, suddenly feeling out of place. She had worked in restaurants all her life, but never one like this. The fine wine glasses, the crisp white tablecloths, the hushed conversations. It was like a world she had only seen in movies. Taking a deep breath, she walked inside, her footsteps echoing slightly in the quiet ambiance. The hostess smiled warmly at her, as if she had belonged here all along, and led her to a secluded corner. And then, she saw him. Daniel sat at the table, his tall figure commanding the space. Dressed in an expensive black suit, he exuded an effortless confidence, his chiseled jaw and piercing blue eyes locked on the menu in front of him. He didn't notice her at first, his expression unreadable, as if he were deep in thought. He was the kind of man that others gravitated toward, without even trying. He seemed like he had everything in the world: wealth, power, and control. But the more Sophia looked at him, the more she wondered, did he have anything more? Anything real? "Mr. Daniels." The hostess's voice broke her thoughts. He looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't just a glance, it was a recognition, something unexpected. She felt a strange pull toward him, a quiet awareness, as though time had slowed for that brief second. "Yes, I'm Daniel," he said smoothly, his voice low and deep, exuding confidence. His eyes scanned her for a moment, taking in her modest dress and the way she fidgeted nervously with her hands. Sophia smiled, a little unsure of herself, but trying to appear calm. "I'm Sophia," she replied, her voice betraying just a hint of the anxiety she felt. She sat down across from him, placing her purse on the chair beside her. The waiter came over, and they both ordered their drinks, the small talk starting as he opened the wine list. Daniel didn't seem in any rush to get to know her, but neither did he seem disinterested. He was detached, yet polite. Sophia, on the other hand, was struggling to find her footing, caught between trying to impress him and staying true to herself. The silence between them stretched for a few moments, until Daniel finally broke it. "So, Sophia," he began, his tone casual, but with an undertone of curiosity. "Tell me, what brings you to this blind date?" Sophia took a breath, feeling a flush on her cheeks. "I guess I didn't expect much. My friend set me up. I've always been a bit of a skeptic about things like this," she said, her words coming out faster than she intended. Daniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A skeptic, huh? What about me made you say yes?" She hesitated, then gave him a small smile. "I suppose I wanted to be proven wrong, that there could be more to life than the day-to-day grind. Maybe I could be surprised." Daniel chuckled softly, but there was something behind his laugh, something genuine, yet tinged with sadness. "Maybe we both came here hoping to be surprised." Sophia couldn't help but notice the slight vulnerability in his words. For the first time, she saw him as more than just a wealthy businessman. He was a person too, with his own doubts and insecurities. But she pushed those thoughts away. She wasn't here to analyze him. She was here to see where this evening could take her. The night continued with more awkward small talk, but beneath it all, there was something stirring, something that neither could quite explain. As their conversation shifted to safer topics, travel, hobbies, family, their shared moments of genuine laughter felt warmer than the expensive meal before them. It was as though, despite their different worlds, there was an undeniable connection, a magnetic force pulling them closer with each passing minute. Sophia, though nervous, began to relax. She allowed herself to enjoy the moment, telling him about her childhood, her dreams of one day opening her own cafe. Daniel listened, truly listening for the first time in a long while. For a man who had everything, he seemed oddly interested in the simple things she shared. For a brief moment, the world outside of their table seemed to disappear, and in its place was a connection neither had expected. The evening unfolded quietly, with conversation flowing more easily between them as the hours passed. They shared stories, exchanged laughter, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a sense of ease he hadn't realized he'd been missing. At first, he had been annoyed at the thought of being stuck on a blind date. But now, as he listened to Sophia's laugh and watched the way she spoke with such genuine warmth, something inside him shifted. Sophia, too, began to relax. The tension she had felt earlier melted away as she noticed how attentive Daniel was. He wasn't like the men she had seen in her world, those who expected attention and admiration, simply because of their status. Daniel listened without judgment. He didn't look at her like she was just another waitress, or a woman out of her depth in his world. He seemed to see her as a person, not an idea. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere between them had changed. The tension had dissipated into something more palpable, a warmth, a magnetic pull that neither of them could ignore. As they shared a piece of rich chocolate cake, they fell into a comfortable silence, savoring the sweetness and the moment itself. "Do you always make people feel so comfortable?" Sophia asked, breaking the silence. She didn't even realize the question had slipped out until she saw the surprise in his eyes. Daniel chuckled softly, a genuine smile playing on his lips. "I don't usually make an effort to, but with you, it's different." Sophia looked at him, her green eyes searching his face for sincerity. She found it there, something rare and unexpected. He wasn't like the other wealthy men she had encountered, men who saw relationships as transactions or opportunities. He was real. But as the night wore on, she couldn't help but wonder, was he just putting on a mask? Was this charm real, or was it part of the image he needed to maintain? She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered. It wasn't just his money or his power that intrigued her. It was the vulnerability she sensed beneath his polished exterior. He wasn't perfect. No one was. And that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something real between them. "Tell me more about you, Sophia," Daniel said, his voice low and smooth, like the calm before a storm. "What makes you tick?" Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type breakfast if you've made it this far. Only those who get this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. Sophia shifted in her seat, a little embarrassed by the question. I don't know," she murmured. "I've always worked hard. I've never really had time for much else. But I want to be more than just a waitress, you know? I want to have my own place one day. A cafe. Something small, but meaningful." Daniel's eyes softened as he listened. He had heard similar dreams before, but something about the way she spoke about her aspirations, so raw, so unguarded, moved him. It was the kind of passion he had long since lost, buried under years of business deals and endless hours of work. He had forgotten what it was like to dream without restrictions. "I think you'll get there," Daniel said softly, his voice carrying an unspoken confidence. "You seem like someone who doesn't just wait for things to happen. You go after them." The words hung in the air, and Sophia felt something stir inside her. She had spent so long focused on survival, on getting by, on working hard, that she had almost forgotten what it was like to have someone believe in her potential, to be seen. She smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Thank you." As they finished their dessert and the evening drew to a close, Daniel stood up, offering her a hand. "Shall we?" Sophia hesitated for a moment before accepting, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. It was a simple touch, but it sent an unexpected jolt of electricity through her. She pulled her hand away quickly, but the feeling lingered. They walked out into the cool night air together, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, but filled with a promise neither of them was willing to voice just yet. Sophia couldn't deny the attraction she felt. She had expected the evening to be an awkward, forgettable experience. But instead, she found herself drawn to Daniel in a way she hadn't expected. Daniel, for his part, found himself in unfamiliar territory. His life had always been about control, about knowing the outcome of every situation. But with Sophia, there was something unpredictable, something refreshing. She didn't seem interested in what he could do for her. She simply wanted to be herself. The attraction was undeniable, but there was more to it than just physical chemistry. There was something deeper, a connection neither of them could quite explain. As they reached the end of the evening, Daniel turned to Sophia. "I'm glad we did this," he said quietly, his voice softer than she had expected. Sophia nodded, her heart racing. "Me too." But as they said their goodbyes, a question hung in the air. Could they overcome the differences that divided them? Or was this just a fleeting connection that would disappear as quickly as it had begun? The restaurant was quieter tonight than their previous outings. The soft murmur of conversations around them almost felt like background noise, a distant hum as Daniel and Sophia sat across from each other. Daniel's eyes were fixed on his plate, but his mind seemed far away. He hadn't been this open in years, certainly not with someone who wasn't a business associate or a close family member. But tonight, something felt different. The distance between them, though still palpable, was narrowing. Do you ever feel like no one really sees you, even when you're surrounded by people? Daniel asked quietly, his voice laced with an unexpected vulnerability. Sophia looked up from her meal, surprised by the question. Her brow furrowed slightly. Like, you mean in the sense that people don't truly understand who you are? She asked, unsure where he was going with it. He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. I mean, it's strange. People see me as the successful businessman, the millionaire with everything I could ever want. Daniel paused, his gaze flicking to her, his eyes almost searching. But the truth is, the more I have, the more lonely I feel. I don't know who would still want to be around if I didn't have money. I wonder sometimes if anyone really cares about me. Sophia's heart softened. She didn't expect him to share something so personal. She placed her fork down gently, thinking for a moment before speaking. I get it, she said quietly, her voice filled with empathy. I used to think I was invisible too, always working, always trying to fix things for my mum. It felt like no one saw me either, just a girl trying to survive. But I think part of me always wished someone would look past all of that and see who I really was. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. You never told me much about your mum. Sophia hesitated, her eyes dropping to the table. It's complicated, she said, her voice catching slightly. She's been sick for years now, and sometimes I feel like I'm the only one holding everything together for her. But it's exhausting, and I don't know how much longer I can do it. There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with understanding. Sophia's words hung in the air, and Daniel could feel the weight of them. You don't have to carry it all alone, Daniel said softly, his voice more tender than usual. You shouldn't have to. Sophia's eyes met his, a flicker of emotion passing between them. She hadn't expected him to understand, but in that moment, she felt seen. She smiled faintly. I don't know. I guess I'm just afraid that if I let anyone in, they'll think I'm weak or not good enough. Or worse, they'll leave when they realize how much I'm struggling. Daniel shook his head, his gaze intense. No one would leave because of that. At least, not the right person. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Sophia felt her heart swell with emotion. There was something about him tonight, something that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so alone in the world after all. But still, there was hesitation. She couldn't quite let herself believe it. The night was a whirlwind of bright lights, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Daniel had invited Sophia to a high-profile charity event, hosted by one of his business partners. The venue was grand, an opulent ballroom adorned with sparkling chandeliers, velvet curtains, and a long line of waitstaff in black suits. Sophia stood next to Daniel, feeling the sharp contrast between her simple dress and the designer gowns surrounding her. Her fingers tightened around the glass of champagne in her hand, her eyes scanning the room. She felt a pang of discomfort with each glance she caught from the elegant women around her. They were talking about vacations in Paris, the latest fashion trends, and charity auctions she could hardly understand. The words seemed to swirl around her, unfamiliar and almost foreign. She tried to smile, to be polite, but she felt like an outsider in a world she didn't belong to. As Daniel conversed with a group of colleagues, Sophia could feel the weight of their glances on her, the way they looked at her, as if trying to place her in a world that felt so distant from hers. Are you okay? Daniel's voice interrupted her thoughts, his brow furrowed with concern. Sophia blinked, snapping out of her daze. Yeah, I'm fine, she said quickly, her smile forced. She didn't want him to see how uncomfortable she was. She didn't want him to know that she was suffocating in a room full of people who seemed so perfect. Daniel didn't notice her unease. He smiled at her, his arm gently brushing hers. I'm glad you could make it. I know this isn't your usual scene, but it's important to me that you're here. Sophia nodded, trying to hide the nervousness in her chest. "I appreciate the invitation," she said softly. "It's just, I'm not used to this kind of thing." He chuckled lightly, thinking it was just the nerves talking. "You'll get used to it. This world is nothing to be afraid of." But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was already out of place. It wasn't just the lavish surroundings. It was the people. The way they spoke, the way they looked at her. It felt like she was a different species altogether. She excused herself, making her way to the bathroom to escape the suffocating atmosphere. She leaned against the cool sink, trying to steady her breathing. The woman in the mirror seemed foreign to her. This woman who was standing in a room full of millionaires, surrounded by luxury and perfection. "Why did I think I could belong here?" she whispered to herself, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of confusion and fear. Back in the ballroom, Daniel chatted with a couple of other guests, blissfully unaware of the turmoil Sophia was experiencing. To him, she was simply shy, unsure of herself in a new environment. He had no idea that the gulf between their worlds was growing wider with each passing moment. Sophia returned to his side shortly after, her smile back in place, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. As the night went on, she tried her best to keep up with the conversation, but the nagging feeling of being out of place never quite left her. She laughed when it felt appropriate and nodded when she was supposed to, but it was all just a mask. Daniel looked at her, his smile warm and genuine. "See? You're doing great," he said, his voice full of encouragement. Sophia returned a shaky smile, but inside, she was starting to wonder if this relationship, so full of hope and possibility, could ever bridge the gap between their worlds. The days following the charity event were quiet. Sophia tried her best to continue as if everything was normal, but inside, she felt a shift. The events of that night had lingered in her mind. The glances, the whispers, the feeling of being inadequate. All of it weighed heavily on her. She had always prided herself on being strong, but the more she spent time with Daniel, the more she realized how much she had hidden behind a wall. She feared that her past, her struggles and her modest beginnings would one day be too much for him to bear. She could see the way his world was full of glitz and glamour, while hers felt so raw and real. What could she possibly offer him in return? Across town, Daniel was struggling with his own doubts. He had felt the distance between them, the hesitation in her smile, the slight coolness in her touch. It was subtle, but it was there. He had always been the confident, self-assured man. But when it came to Sophia, he felt uncertain. He'd never had to fight for someone's affection before. But with her, it wasn't about money or status. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was pulling away. And the thought of losing her terrified him more than he was willing to admit. They met again for dinner one evening, at a small, cozy restaurant away from the noise of the city. The atmosphere was intimate, with low lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. Daniel had chosen it because he knew it was a place where they could talk without distractions. But when they sat down across from each other, the silence between them felt heavier than usual. Sophia absent-mindedly stirred her drink, her gaze fixed on the table. Daniel, watching her, couldn't help but feel a pang of concern. "Sophia," he began, his voice soft but steady. "What's going on? I can tell something's on your mind." She glanced up at him, her eyes betraying the vulnerability she had been trying to hide. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. How could she explain the doubts swirling in her mind, the fears of not being good enough, of being from two different worlds? "I'm fine," she said, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel didn't believe her. He leaned in a little, his eyes searching hers. "You're not fine. I know you, Sophia. You can talk to me." The sincerity in his voice made her heart race. She wanted to tell him everything, the weight of her past, the pressure she felt, the fear that he'd eventually grow tired of her, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she looked down at her hands, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. I don't know if I belong here, Daniel, she said quietly. With you, I mean. I'm not like the people you're used to being around. Daniel was silent for a long moment. He hadn't expected her to say that. His mind raced, wondering how to respond. Was she feeling inferior? Was she scared? I never wanted you to feel out of place, he finally said, his voice gentle. Sophia, none of that matters to me. What matters is you. But Sophia shook her head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. You say that, but I can't help feeling like I don't fit. Like I'm not enough for you. I'm just a waitress with a mother who needs me. And you're you. You deserve someone who fits in your world. Daniel reached across the table, his hand resting over hers. For a moment, she didn't pull away, and that small connection felt like a lifeline. You don't have to fit into any world except the one we're building together, he said firmly. I care about you, Sophia. I don't care about your past or your job or your background. I care about you. She looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. His words were exactly what she needed to hear, yet something inside her still held her back. I'm not perfect, she whispered. I can't give you everything you want. Daniel smiled softly, squeezing her hand. I don't want everything, Sophia. I just want you. I've never met anyone like you. But as he said the words, he felt a knot in his stomach. He wasn't being completely honest with himself. He too was scared that their worlds were too different, that no matter how much he cared for her, it wouldn't be enough. But he wasn't ready to give up on her. They sat in silence for a long while, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them. Neither of them knew how to break the silence, how to fully admit what was in their hearts. But for the first time in a long while, both of them realized that maybe love didn't need to make sense. For now, all they had was each other, and that had to be enough. Sophia's feelings of isolation deepened over the following weeks. As her connection with Daniel grew, so did her fear of him discovering the truth about her life. She had been trying to keep everything under control. Her mother's mounting medical bills, the rent she could barely afford, and the quiet, constant worry that hung over her like a shadow. The small lies she had told Daniel to keep her struggles at bay were starting to feel like an unbearable weight. Daniel, on the other hand, had begun noticing the signs. At first, they were subtle. A fleeting hesitation when they passed expensive boutiques, a faint discomfort when he mentioned luxury vacations or high-end dinners. He noticed that Sophia would always suggest simpler, more modest places. She would smile, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And then there were the phone calls, the ones that she would quickly hang up from when he entered the room, the ones that always left her looking more stressed than when she'd picked up the phone. Something didn't sit right with him. He wanted to ask her about it, but every time the question bubbled to the surface, he hesitated. He didn't want to push her, especially since he knew she valued her privacy. Yet, the more he tried to dismiss the doubts, the stronger they became. It wasn't until they were having dinner one evening that Daniel could no longer ignore it. They were sitting in a quiet corner of the same small restaurant, the soft candlelight flickering between them. As they enjoyed their meal, he noticed that Sophia wasn't eating as much as usual. She seemed distracted, her fork hovering over her plate, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Sophia, he said softly, setting his fork down. I need to know what's going on. Something's not right. She looked up at him, her heart racing. The last thing she wanted was to share her burdens with him, especially not after everything they had been through. But the sadness in Daniel's eyes was undeniable, and she knew he wouldn't stop until he had the truth. I don't know what you mean, she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice trembled. Daniel didn't buy it. His eyes locked onto hers, his expression turning serious. You've been avoiding certain things, Sophia. I see it. You can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I care about you too much to just ignore this. Sophia swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had promised herself she would never let him in on the full extent of her situation. She didn't want him to pity her, didn't want him to think less of her. But she could see the concern in his eyes, and something in her broke. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been trying to keep it all together, but it's not easy. My mum, she's sick. She's been getting worse. And the bills, they just keep piling up. I've been doing everything I can to take care of her, to keep her comfortable. But sometimes, I feel like I'm drowning." She paused, feeling a weight lift off her chest as the truth finally escaped her lips. But there was still more she had to say. "I can't afford a lot of things. I can barely keep up with my rent, and sometimes I feel like I'm one step away from losing everything." Daniel's heart ached as he listened to her words, the pain in her voice, the way she had carried this burden alone for so long. It hit him harder than he had anticipated. His first instinct was to reach out to her, to comfort her, but a part of him hesitated. He couldn't deny the shock he felt at her confession. "You should have told me," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to go through this alone, Sophia. I want to help." Sophia recoiled slightly, her body tensing as if the very idea of receiving help felt foreign to her. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said, shaking her head. "I didn't want you to think I was only interested in your money or that I couldn't handle things on my own." "I never thought that, Sophia," Daniel replied, his tone unwavering. "But you don't have to carry this weight by yourself. I care about you, and I want to be here for you no matter what." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions threatening to spill over. She had kept her secret for so long, afraid that it would push him away. And now, as the words left her lips, she realized that the fear of losing him was far greater than the fear of revealing the truth. But as Daniel reached out to take her hand, something shifted in the air between them. The trust had been broken, but at the same time, it felt as though a new kind of connection was forming, one that was built on honesty, no matter how painful that honesty might be. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking up at him with teary eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." Daniel squeezed her hand, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He understood why she had kept her secret, but at the same time, he couldn't help but feel betrayed. He didn't know how to process it yet, but he promised himself that he wouldn't walk away from her, not now, not when she needed him the most. "I'm not going anywhere, Sophia," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together." The evening that followed Sophia's confession was filled with a tense silence. Daniel drove her home, neither of them speaking a word as the hum of the car engine filled the empty spaces between them. When they finally arrived at her apartment, Sophia got out of the car first, avoiding eye contact. She didn't know what to say, how to make things better after what she'd just shared. Daniel didn't follow her immediately. He sat in the car for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing. His thoughts were all over the place. On one hand, he understood why she had kept her struggles hidden. She had always been fiercely independent. But on the other hand, the secrecy felt like a betrayal. How could she not have trusted him enough to share something so important? When he finally entered the building, he saw Sophia standing by her door, looking small and fragile in the dim hallway light. She met his gaze, but didn't speak. The weight of the silence was suffocating. "I didn't want this, Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to lie to you, but I didn't know how to tell you the truth." Daniel nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I get it, Sophia. I really do," he said, though his voice was thick with emotion. "But it doesn't change the fact that you hid this from me. You let me get close to you, while keeping such a huge part of your life away from me." His words stung, and they both knew it. Sophia winced at the harshness in his voice. I didn't want you to look at me like I'm weak. I didn't want you to think that I wasn't good enough. Daniel felt a pang in his chest at her words. She was right. In some ways, he had looked at her differently after hearing the truth, not because he thought less of her for having struggles, but because he felt like she had put up a wall between them. Do you really think I'd look down on you for something like that? He asked, a touch of frustration creeping into his voice. I didn't know this about you, Sophia. All this time, you've been putting on a front. I thought we were getting closer, and then I find out you've been hiding so much from me. Sophia closed her eyes, fighting back the tears. She hated this. She hated how vulnerable she felt, how exposed her past and her failures seemed. She wanted nothing more than to crawl into a hole and disappear. I never wanted to hurt you, she said softly, her voice shaking. I just wanted to keep us from getting tangled in my problems. I thought if you knew the truth, you wouldn't want to be with me anymore. Why didn't you trust me? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his tone broken. He wasn't angry at her. He was hurt. We've spent so much time together. I thought we were past all this hiding, this pretending. I know, Sophia replied, her voice cracking, and I regret it. But I didn't know how to tell you, not without feeling like I was asking for your pity. She shook her head, a few tears finally breaking free. I don't want your pity, Daniel. I never did. Daniel stepped closer to her, a conflicted expression on his face. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but the weight of the betrayal still lingered. He was torn between wanting to forgive her and the sting of feeling deceived. Let's have some fun with the readers in the comments. Type love if you've made it this far. Now, let's get back to the story. I just don't know if I can trust you again, he said softly, almost to himself. You've kept so much from me. How am I supposed to believe that you're being honest with me now? Sophia's heart sank at his words. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now, Daniel. I just want you to understand why I did what I did. She paused, wiping away her tears. I wanted to protect us. I thought if I told you everything, it would ruin what we had. But it's ruined now, isn't it? Daniel asked, his voice tight. I don't know if we can go back to how things were. Sophia felt her chest tighten as she realized the truth of what he was saying. She had never imagined that things could unravel so quickly. She had tried so hard to keep up appearances, but now everything she had tried to protect felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. The silence stretched between them, both of them uncertain about what to say next. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice softer now, but still laced with doubt. I don't know, Sophia, he admitted. I don't know if I can get past this. It's not just about the secret, it's about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you the way I used to. Sophia swallowed the lump in her throat. She had never wanted to hurt him like this, but now she could see how much damage had been done. She had built walls around herself for so long that she had forgotten how to let anyone in, even the person who mattered most. I understand, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I never wanted to make you feel like I was hiding from you. Daniel looked away, his eyes distant, as if he was searching for an answer that wasn't there. I need some time to think, Sophia. I don't know what the future holds for us anymore. Sophia nodded, tears falling freely now. She knew that their relationship had changed forever. And as much as she wanted to fix things, she also knew that it might not be enough. It was a typical family gathering, or at least it was supposed to be. The large, extravagant dinner was in full swing at Daniel's family estate, his mother's idea of a celebration that could bring the family closer together. The grand chandelier above them glittered like the rich, opulent world Daniel had been born into. Guests mingled with glasses of wine, but Daniel felt an unease settle in his chest, especially with the weight of his family's unspoken expectations hanging over him. Sophia's not here yet, His aunt's voice cut through the noise and Daniel winced. "No, she's on her way," Daniel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. But before he could finish his sentence, his mother appeared at his side, the concern evident on her face. "Daniel, I need to speak with you, privately." He excused himself and followed her to a quieter part of the mansion, his heart pounding. His mother, who had always prided herself on controlling the narrative of the family, had never been fond of the idea of Daniel dating someone outside of their world. "I don't understand why you insist on bringing her to these events," his mother said in a low, strained voice. "She's not part of our world, Daniel. She doesn't belong here." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What are you saying, Mum?" "She's just a waitress, Daniel. How long do you think this is going to last? People are starting to talk. She's not good enough for you," his mother continued, her voice clipped, as if every word had been carefully chosen. Daniel's heart raced. The pressure was unbearable, and it only intensified as he tried to balance his feelings for Sophia with his family's relentless expectations. "This is my life, Mum," he said, his voice firm despite the storm brewing inside. "And I'll make my own decisions." But his mother didn't back down. "I don't want you to make a mistake, Daniel. You have everything. You deserve more than her." Meanwhile, Sophia stood outside the grand mansion, clutching her purse, nerves running wild. She had spent the last hour trying to find the right dress, the right words, the right everything to make her fit into Daniel's world. But as much as she tried, she felt out of place here. She'd already taken a step back, mentally preparing herself for the possibility that this evening could be the last time she would ever see him again. Then she saw him, her ex-boyfriend Trevor, standing by the entrance, looking as smug as ever. "Well, well, if it isn't Miss High Society now," Trevor mocked, a sly grin forming on his face. Sophia froze. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. Trevor stepped closer, his eyes scanning her carefully, the smile never leaving his face. "What, you thought you could just ditch me and move on to a rich guy? He's not going to want you for long. You know that, right?" Sophia recoiled, the anger rising inside her. She had left Trevor behind years ago, but his words still stung like fresh wounds. "You don't know anything about my life anymore, Trevor." The tension in the air thickened as Trevor pushed further. "I know you, Sophia. You'll always be the same girl I left behind. You don't belong here. These people don't care about you." Sophia clenched her fists, trying to control the heat building in her chest. But before she could respond, the door behind her opened and Daniel stepped out, his eyes landing on her immediately. Sophia quickly wiped her eyes, but Daniel had already seen the confrontation. He walked up to her, placing a protective hand on her arm. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice sharp. Trevor looked at Daniel with a mocking smile. "So, this is who you've chosen? Cute," he sneered. "She's just a waitress, Daniel. Don't let her fool you." Sophia's face burned. The humiliation was unbearable, and she could feel Daniel's gaze on her, but it felt distant. He didn't say anything, his silence making the moment feel even worse. "Let's go, Sophia," Daniel said quietly, pulling her away from Trevor and the family gathering. Sophia wanted to protest, but her voice caught in her throat. The weight of Daniel's family's disapproval, combined with the cruelty of her past, was too much. She felt as if the walls were closing in on her. The evening that was meant to unite them was now crumbling, and all she wanted was to escape. The night felt suffocating. The weight of Daniel's family's disapproval, combined with the sharp words of Trevor, lingered in the air. As they left the family event, neither of them spoke a word. The drive back to Daniel's apartment was silent, the tension between them palpable. The muffled sound of the car engine seemed to amplify their discomfort. Finally, Daniel pulled into his driveway, the headlights illuminating the luxurious exterior of his home. He turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. The silence was deafening. Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't stop thinking about the confrontation with Trevor. The hurtful words that she had thought she had long buried now resurfaced, and it felt like her past was following her. She wasn't good enough. Never had been. Never would be. And Daniel, he was starting to see that too. As the seconds ticked by, Daniel finally broke the silence. "Sophia, He paused, not sure how to express the flood of emotions coursing through him. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But something inside him recoiled. He wasn't sure how to fix this. Sophia turned her head to face him, her eyes raw with emotion. "You think I'm not good enough for you, don't you?" she asked, her voice cracking. Daniel was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to ask him that so directly. But it was the truth, wasn't it? He felt the pressure from his family and society to be with someone who fit the mold, someone who could walk alongside him in his world. And yet, he couldn't shake the pull he felt towards Sophia. "I never said that," Daniel said, his tone defensive. "But they're right, Sophia. I don't know how this can work. I don't know how to balance this relationship with everything else." Sophia's face fell. The sting of his words cut deeper than any of Trevor's cruel remarks. "So that's it? You're just going to let your family dictate who I am to you? Who we are?" "No, that's not what I'm saying." Daniel's voice softened, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. "I'm just trying to understand everything. I'm trying to figure out how we fit into each other's worlds." Sophia shook her head, tears welling up. "You don't get it. You're trying to fit me into a box that doesn't exist. I can't be what you want me to be, Daniel. I can't just become someone else to fit into your world." She stepped out of the car, slamming the door behind her with a force that echoed through the night. Her heart was pounding, the emotional weight of the evening too much to bear. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but the floodgates were already open. Daniel sat in the car for a moment longer, his head in his hands. He wanted to go after her, to apologize, to fix things. But the words felt inadequate, and the space between them only seemed to grow larger. Back in his apartment, Daniel paced back and forth. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. He had feelings for Sophia, but he wasn't sure how to reconcile that with the life he had been raised to live. Could they really make it work? Was it even fair to ask her to try? Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands. She had hoped that, despite everything, she could make this relationship work. But now, all she felt was the sharp ache of reality settling in. She didn't belong in Daniel's world. She never had. Trevor's words rang in her ears, and for the first time in a long while, she was questioning everything she had believed about herself. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Can we talk?" Sophia stared at the screen for a long moment, the words swimming in front of her eyes. Part of her wanted to respond, to tell him that everything would be fine, that they could work it out. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt the most, wanted to push him away and never look back. She turned off the phone and threw it on the bed, walking into the bathroom to splash cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a woman torn between her past and her future. She had always fought to survive, to make her own way. And yet here she was, questioning everything. She couldn't help but think, was love enough to bridge the gap between their worlds? Daniel sat in his office, the soft hum of the city below just a faint background noise to the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. His desk was cluttered with paperwork and proposals for new business ventures, but none of it seemed to matter. His mind kept drifting back to Sophia. The days since their argument had been some of the most difficult of his life. He had tried to fill the void with work, but nothing could distract him from the truth that had become clearer with each passing day. He missed her. More than that, he loved her. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had spent so much of his life building this empire, this life of luxury and prestige. But now, in the quiet moments, the one thing that mattered more than all of it was Sophia. Her smile, the way she laughed, the way she saw the world so differently, so honestly. She had brought something into his life that he hadn't even realized was missing. The weight of his family's expectations had always felt heavy, but now it felt suffocating. He had spent years trying to live up to their standards, trying to be the man they wanted him to be. But in doing so, he had pushed away the very person who made him feel alive, the very person who made him question everything about his life. As he looked out the window of his office, Daniel thought about the future. The career offers, the business deals, the endless opportunities, they all seemed so empty now. What good was any of it if he didn't have someone to share it with? If he didn't have Sophia? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a text from his assistant. "Your meeting with the board is in 20 minutes. He glanced at the clock. Another day, another round of business decisions. But it didn't feel important anymore, not without Sophia by his side. He took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over to the window. The skyline stretched out before him, a beautiful but distant reminder of a life he wasn't sure he wanted anymore. He couldn't keep pretending. He couldn't keep sacrificing his happiness for the sake of appearances. Sophia, on the other hand, was finding her own clarity. The space she had taken for herself after the confrontation with Daniel had been painful, but it had also been necessary. She had spent the days reflecting on the relationship, on her own fears, and on the dreams she had for her future. Her past, her struggles with her family, the pain of never feeling good enough, had been holding her back. But as time passed, she realized something important. She deserved to be happy. She deserved to love and be loved. She deserved someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just for the baggage she carried. But the question that still lingered in her mind was whether Daniel could truly accept her, accept all of her. She had so much fear about his world, about how different their lives were. She had never felt like she truly fit in with his wealthy circle, and the idea of him making a grand gesture to win her back only made her question whether he was just trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Was it worth it? Was she worth it? She sat on the couch in her small apartment, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Daniel. "Sophia, I need to see you. Please. I've made up my mind. Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the message, her thoughts racing. She had been avoiding him, unsure of how to approach the conversation that was long overdue. But this message, this simple request, felt like the lifeline she had been waiting for. Could they really fix this? Could she let go of her fears and embrace what he was offering? The next evening, they met at a small park near the waterfront. It was quiet, the cool evening air adding to the somberness of the moment. Daniel was already there when Sophia arrived, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his posture tense but determined. Sophia walked up slowly, unsure of what to expect. Daniel's gaze locked with hers the moment she arrived, and for a brief moment, it felt like nothing else mattered. The rest of the world faded away, leaving just the two of them standing in the middle of this quiet space. Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sophia, I've been an idiot," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent so much time focusing on the wrong things, on what people think I should be, on what my family expects. And in doing so, I lost sight of what really matters." Sophia looked at him, her eyes searching his for the sincerity she had been craving. "And what matters?" she asked softly. "You matter," Daniel said without hesitation. "You matter more than anything I've ever had. I love you, Sophia, and I don't care about my money or my family's expectations. I want to be with you. I want us to have a future together." Sophia felt her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, to let herself fall into this moment. But her fears were still there, lingering in the back of her mind. "I don't know if I can believe you," she whispered, the words heavy with vulnerability. "I don't know if I can let go of everything I've been holding on to." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to let go of everything. I just want to be with you. I want to fight for us. No more games. No more pretending." Sophia's heart ached with the weight of his words. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally did, but they were different this time. They were tears of hope, not of fear. The days following their conversation were filled with a sense of nervous anticipation. Daniel had made his feelings clear, but Sophia still felt a knot in her stomach every time she thought about what he had said. Could she really believe him? Could she let go of the past and allow herself to be vulnerable again? The struggle was not just about trusting him, it was about trusting herself. For so long she had carried the weight of her past, her mistakes, her fears. She had convinced herself that she wasn't worthy of someone like Daniel, someone with so much to offer, someone who seemed to have everything she didn't. Her insecurities had built walls around her heart, walls that she wasn't sure she could break down. But as the days passed, Sophia began to realize something. The way Daniel looked at her, the way he made her feel, like she was the only one in the room, like she mattered, was something she had never experienced before. It wasn't about the money or the lavish lifestyle he could offer. It was about the way he saw her, the way he accepted her flaws without judgment. It was something deeper than anything she had ever known. One evening, she sat alone in her small apartment, her legs tucked beneath her as she thought back to everything that had led up to this point. Her mother's illness, the years of struggling to make ends meet, her broken relationships. She had carried so much weight for so long. But this moment, this love, felt like a chance to finally let go. She picked up her phone and hesitated before texting Daniel. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, then she typed, "I'm ready. I'm ready to let go of the past, Daniel. I want to be with you." She hit send, her heart racing. It was the first time in years that she had allowed herself to be this vulnerable, this open to someone else. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing: she was done holding back. Daniel was sitting in his office when his phone buzzed. He opened the text, his breath catching in his throat. "I'm ready. I'm ready to let go of the past, Daniel. I want to be with you." His heart surged with emotion. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight of them. Sophia was finally opening up to him, allowing him in, letting go of the fears that had kept her distant. In that moment, Daniel knew this was the start of something beautiful. He stood up from his desk and quickly typed a response. "I'll be waiting for you, wherever you are. I'm here." He sent the message and then paced around his office, his mind racing with excitement and nervousness. He knew that their relationship had been rocky, filled with misunderstandings and insecurities. But this was a new beginning. He could feel it in his bones. They were both ready to take the leap. Later that evening, they met at the same park by the water. The air was cooler now, but there was something calm about the moment, something peaceful. Daniel was already there when Sophia arrived, and he smiled when he saw her walking toward him. There was a quiet confidence in her step that he hadn't seen before, as if she had shed some of the weight she had been carrying. She stopped a few feet away from him, her hands nervously tugging at the hem of her jacket. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice full of warmth and understanding. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sophia looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know," she whispered. I've been so scared. Scared of losing myself, scared of not being enough. But I realized something. What I've been afraid of is not you. It's me. I've held on to my past for so long, thinking that it would define me. But I'm done. I'm ready to embrace this, to embrace you. Daniel's heart swelled with pride. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm so proud of you. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Sophia. We'll figure this out together. You're more than enough. You always have been. She smiled, the weight of her fears starting to lift. I love you, Daniel, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. And I'm ready to be the woman you deserve. Daniel pulled her into a gentle hug, holding her close. And I love you, Sophia. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. We're stronger than anything that comes our way. They stood there in each other's arms, the city lights twinkling in the distance, a symbol of the new chapter they were beginning together. The phone call came early in the morning. Daniel had just finished his coffee when his assistant, Jessica, called with the news. The voice on the other end was filled with urgency, and Daniel immediately knew it was something important. Daniel, I have some big news, Jessica said, her tone enthusiastic. The opportunity we've been waiting for, the acquisition deal with Peterson and Company. It's finally come through. They want you to head the entire operation. This could be the break you've been waiting for. Daniel felt a surge of excitement, but something deep within him paused. Peterson and Company was one of the largest firms in the industry, and this deal would skyrocket his career. It was everything he had worked for. But as he thought about the project, his thoughts inevitably drifted to Sophia. The catch was that the project would require him to relocate to another city, far away from the life he had started to build with her. The decision was looming, and the weight of it felt like a heavy stone in his chest. He couldn't help but wonder, would this be worth it? Later that afternoon, Sophia walked into the small cafe where she worked, her heart racing. She had just received a call from a top-tier restaurant chain that wanted her to become their executive chef, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The pay was more than generous, the prestige was unparalleled, and the position was hers if she accepted. But there was a catch too. The job was in another city, hundreds of miles away, and accepting the offer would mean leaving everything behind, including Daniel. Her heart was torn. She had never imagined she'd be in this position, standing at the edge of a life-changing decision, wondering what path would lead her to happiness. Sophia paced back and forth in her small apartment that night, her mind racing. She didn't know how to feel. On one hand, this job was everything she had dreamed of, but on the other hand, it felt like she would be leaving behind the most important person in her life. She couldn't imagine life without Daniel, but the career opportunity was so tempting, so all-encompassing. She couldn't ignore the promise of the future it offered her, but she also didn't want to give up on what she had with him. Could she have both? The next day, Daniel and Sophia met for dinner. Neither of them mentioned their respective opportunities right away, but both were visibly distracted. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Daniel broke the silence first. Sophia, I need to tell you something. I've been offered a huge opportunity with Peterson and Company. They want me to head the entire project, and it would require me to relocate. It's a big step, and I've worked my whole life for this. Sophia felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had seen the ambition in his eyes, the same ambition that had driven him to build his empire. It made sense. She had always admired his drive, his passion, but the thought of him leaving her, of them being apart, brought a wave of fear she hadn't expected. That sounds incredible, Daniel, she said softly, trying to mask the hurt in her voice. But I have some news too. I was offered a position as the executive chef for a restaurant chain. It's a dream job for me, and I could make a name for myself, but it means I'd have to move to a different city. Daniel's heart sank. He had hoped that the timing of their conversation wouldn't coincide like this. Now both of them were facing choices that would alter their future, and neither of those choices included the other. Sophia's gaze met his, filled with uncertainty. "What do we do, Daniel?" she asked. "We both have opportunities that could change everything, but I don't know if I can make a choice, not when it means losing you. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type juice if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. Now, let's continue with the story." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb gently brushing over her fingers. "I don't want to lose you, Sophia, but I can't pretend that this isn't a huge opportunity for me. I've worked my whole life to get to this point." Sophia's chest tightened as she fought back tears. "I feel the same way, but I don't want to stand in the way of your dreams. And I don't want to lose myself in the process either. I need to make my own way in this world, but I can't help but feel like we're at a crossroads. Like this is the moment that will define everything." As they sat there in the quiet of the restaurant, the weight of their decisions hung in the air. The future seemed uncertain, the path ahead shrouded in doubt. Both of them were facing what felt like the most important choices of their lives. Choices that had the potential to tear them apart or bring them even closer together. The conversation drifted to lighter topics as the night went on, but both Daniel and Sophia knew that the reality of their situation loomed large. They had a lot to think about, and neither was sure what the other would decide. Days passed in a blur of emotions and silence between Daniel and Sophia. They each wrestled with their decisions, replaying their conversations over and over in their minds. The future felt more uncertain with every passing hour, and the once clear paths seemed increasingly blurred. They hadn't spoken much since their dinner, but the unspoken weight of their choices hung in the air like a heavy fog. One afternoon, Daniel sat in his office, staring out the window. His mind wandered back to that pivotal moment when he had been offered the opportunity of a lifetime. It should have been an easy choice, but the thought of leaving Sophia, of walking away from the love they had fought so hard to build, made it impossible to feel joy about the offer. He had built his empire from the ground up, but none of it mattered if he didn't have someone to share it with. Sophia. The name echoed in his mind. The thought of her smile, her warmth, the way she made him feel understood and loved. None of his achievements mattered without her by his side. But could he really walk away from everything he had worked for? Could he risk losing his career just to hold on to a love that seemed to be slipping away? Meanwhile, in the small kitchen of her apartment, Sophia was facing her own dilemma. She had spent hours looking at the job offer, weighing the pros and cons, but it was all just noise in her head. The opportunity was everything she had dreamed of. Yet, she kept imagining her life without Daniel, and the idea was unbearable. She closed her eyes and let the silence engulf her. She thought about her childhood, her struggles with her mother, and the years spent building walls around her heart. But Daniel had broken through those walls, offering her something she never thought she deserved. True love, acceptance, and a partnership that felt genuine and real. Could she really walk away from that? Could she really leave him behind in the name of career success? The answer was clear. Her heart had already made the choice for her, and now she had to act on it. That evening, Daniel called Sophia. His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable vulnerability beneath it. "Sophia, can we meet tonight? I think I've made my decision." Sophia's heart raced as she heard the tremor in his voice. She'd been dreading this moment, yet somehow she knew in her gut that this was the moment when everything would finally make sense. Later that night, they met at a quiet cafe. Neither of them spoke at first, the tension thick between them. They both knew that their decisions would affect the rest of their lives. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice soft but firm. "About everything. About us, about my career. And I realized something important. I don't want to make a decision that leaves me empty inside. I've spent so much of my life chasing success, but I don't want to chase it at the cost of losing you." Sophia's eyes widened slightly as she listened, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Daniel continued, "I'm turning down the offer. I'm staying here with you. I know it's not an easy choice, and I don't know what the future holds, but I can't let this go. I want to be with you, Sophia. I want to build something real with you, not just with my business." Sophia felt a rush of emotions as she took in his words. The relief, the joy, the fear, all mixed together in a moment that felt like both the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. "Daniel, I don't know what to say," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd have to choose between you and my dreams. I thought I'd have to let you go for the sake of my career. But I see now that I don't have to. I can have both. I want to stay with you. I want to build a life with you." Her eyes glistened as she spoke, a tear slipping down her cheek. Daniel reached across the table and gently wiped it away with his thumb, his heart swelling with love for her. "I love you, Sophia," Daniel whispered, his voice full of tenderness, "and I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you." The decision was made. Both of them had sacrificed parts of themselves. Daniel had given up a career-changing opportunity, and Sophia had put aside her fears of being dependent on someone else. But in doing so, they had chosen each other. The future was uncertain, but they no longer feared it. They were ready to face it together, side by side, knowing that love was worth every sacrifice. A few weeks had passed since Daniel and Sophia had made their decisions. The weight of their choices had lifted, replaced with a new sense of purpose. They had faced the toughest moments in their relationship, the doubts, the fears, and the emotional upheavals. Yet, through it all, they had found something more powerful than their individual struggles: each other. They stood on the balcony of Daniel's apartment one evening, looking out over the skyline. The city stretched out before them, lit up like a canvas of dreams. It was in this moment of stillness that they realized how far they had come. What once seemed impossible, building a future together, was now within their reach. Daniel wrapped his arms around Sophia, pulling her close. "We've been through so much," he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and tenderness. "But we're here, together." Sophia leaned into him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "I never imagined I'd be standing here with you, Daniel, but now that I am, I can't imagine being anywhere else." She took his hand in hers and looked up at the stars. They were so clear that night, as if the universe was acknowledging the new chapter they had begun. The future felt full of possibilities, and though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, they knew they were ready to face it. The following week, Daniel and Sophia made a public appearance together at an event. It was a small gathering, but it marked a significant moment in their relationship, an outward symbol of their commitment. There were still whispers from the guests, some surprised by the couple's union, others questioning whether it would last. But for Daniel and Sophia, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that they had chosen each other, and they had the strength to endure anything together. Sophia looked radiant as she walked beside Daniel, her hand tucked securely in his. She had always been afraid of what people might think, afraid that she wasn't enough for someone like Daniel. But now, she realized she didn't need the approval of others. Her happiness didn't depend on their validation. It depended on what she and Daniel shared, a deep, unconditional love. At the event, Daniel introduced Sophia to more of his colleagues and friends. He was no longer the guarded man he had once been. With each introduction, he proudly referred to her as his partner, his equal, and Sophia, though still a bit shy in the spotlight, felt an overwhelming sense of pride in their connection. She knew they had earned this moment together. Later that evening, after the event, the couple returned to Daniel's apartment, their steps lighter, their hearts fuller. They sat together on the couch, wrapped in each other's presence, savoring the quiet after the buzz of the event. Daniel took a deep breath and looked at Sophia with a soft smile. "You know, I used to think that having everything, money, status, success, was the key to happiness. But I realize now that it was never about that. It was about having someone to share it with." Sophia smiled back, her eyes warm. "I used to think I had to be perfect, that I had to have it all together, but you showed me that it's okay to be imperfect, to have struggles, and that love is worth everything, even the tough times." They sat in comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined. The words they had exchanged, the promises they had made, felt like the foundation of something unshakable. As the night wore on, Sophia thought about everything she had been through, the struggles with her mother, the uncertainty about her future, and the fear that she wasn't good enough for someone like Daniel. But all of that now felt distant. It no longer defined her. What mattered was that she had found a love that was real, a love that had no conditions, no barriers. Daniel, too, had been through his own battles, the pressure of being a millionaire, the expectations from his family and colleagues. It had all weighed on him. But in Sophia, he had found someone who loved him for who he truly was, not for his wealth or status. She had shown him that real happiness came from within, and that love, not material success, was the greatest treasure of all. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, Daniel and Sophia stood at the window, looking out at the city. There was a sense of peace between them, a quiet contentment that they hadn't known before. They had taken the long, winding road to get here, but it had been worth it. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if we hadn't met?" Sophia asked softly, her voice filled with wonder. Daniel turned to face her, his eyes warm and loving. "I don't think I want to imagine a life without you in it." Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Me neither." Together, they faced the future, knowing that whatever challenges came their way, they would tackle them together. With love, with understanding, and with the unwavering support they had for each other, they knew they were ready to take on the world. The couple had faced their fears, their doubts, and their insecurities, and had emerged stronger than ever. Their journey was far from over, but they had built a foundation that would hold them steady no matter what came next. They were ready for their new beginning. So what do you think? Did Daniel make the right choice in giving Sophia a second chance? Or was his love for her not enough to overcome the world he's always known? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this emotional roller coaster of a story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss any of our heartfelt and dramatic tales. If you're still craving more stories of love, secrets, and second chances, click right here on the end screen to keep watching.